So Parker, thank you for talking with us today. Introduce yourself to everybody.
Yeah, I'm Parker. I'm the director of public outreach for Fight the New Drug, which is a non-religious, non-legislative nonprofit that seeks to educate people on the impacts of porn using science facts and personal accounts.
Very cool. So what led you to come and work for Fight the New Drug? What was it that you were like, hey, this is where I need to be. This is where my career needs to be right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the story kind of goes back a little ways. In uh, in 2015, I heard about Fight the New Drug, so a decade ago. And back then, Facebook was still cool. And I saw them on Facebook. I saw a campaign they were doing. I was like, oh, this is a great thing. Like, I love this. This is awesome. Um, and so I was like, okay, well, I want to like kind of be a follower of this. So I followed them. I tried to, participate in campaigns. I tried to share it with other people, just kind of the things that you do as a passive follower of a movement. And then I went to a live event they had in 2016 or 17. They happened to have a live event somewhat near me, and I went to that, brought a friend, and I was just thinking, I know a lot of people my age that struggle with this. I want to be able to help them. So I went to this event, and I also at the time wanted to get into public speaking. I was studying communications in college. I knew I wanted to do some public speaking. And it just so happened that the speaker at that particular event was one of the original like founders of the nonprofit. And so I was like, oh, maybe I'll chat with him after, see if he has any thoughts, or maybe I could like speak for Fight the Drug. That would be cool. And a little bit of naivety is a good thing, I think. So I after the event ends, I'm like all excited to go talk to him and realize there's like, a million people that want to talk to him. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that was kind of silly not to realize that a bunch of people are going to have questions for him. So I knew the person that put the event together. I decided to just help clean up. So I hung out with this guy, Doug. We were cleaning up the event, rolling up extension cords, putting away equipment and stuff like that. And then it kind of finally winded down. All the questions were done. He was going to leave. He's like, oh, by the way, did you have a question? I was like, oh, I did actually. I was curious about public speaking. Like I've always wanted to get into it. I don't know if there's any opportunities or if you have thoughts. And he kind of gave me some advice, but it wasn't like what I was hoping. It wasn't like, oh, we speakers fight the drugs. So I was like, oh, that's kind of a buzzkill, but that's good. Like I'm glad that someone who does some public speaking had some things to tell me. That's great. And then he was leaving the venue, and the person that put the event together just real quick was like, oh, by the way, Clay, Parker's awesome. And he kind of like dead stopped his tracks. He's like, actually, we do need some outside speakers right now. Is that something you'd be interested in? I was like, yeah, absolutely. And so he gave me his email, and then Fight the Drug, our certification process is pretty like rigorous for speakers, just due to the nature of the content, the audience we're speaking to, the fact that we're not religious, not legislative. And so I kind of went through all of that. And then I started speaking for Fight the Drug in 2017 and did that for about 2 years till 2019. And at the very, very beginning of 2019 in January, there was an opening that became available. I started working here full time. When I was a speaker, I was just contracted, worked for them. And then, so I've worked here in the office for a little over 6 years, and it's been great.
Very good. Very good, man.
One
That's
thing led to
awesome.
another,
Yeah, that's great. It's good when you can see your progression like that, and it's just a blessing all the way through and all that. So that's awesome. So help me understand this as a parent of a middle schooler, and a lot of people who are listening are parents of middle schoolers and high schoolers, and I obviously understand elementary as well. When we were growing up, pornography was a magazine or it was a calendar. You heard rumors of like VHS tapes, and it was a thing, but it wasn't a big deal like it is today. So how can porn affect the brain like a drug?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we kind of often say, if pornography was still the pornography that your generation was dealing with, we might not exist. Like we often say that, because the issue is what is readily available to kids today is not what was printed in a magazine, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. So yeah, let's kind of dive in with some of these issues. So at Fight the Drug, we seek to educate on how porn impacts individuals, their relationships, and then our society as a whole. And you asked the question, why is it kind of called Fight the Drug? How does it impact the individual consumer? Obviously, Fight the Drug is like a name that we came up with to grab people's attention. And what we're trying to help people to realize is that research shows porn can be habit forming, it can be an escalating behavior, and it can impact the individual consumer's mental health. So when we're talking about just the individual, the consumer, those are the three greatest impacts that porn has. So habit forming, meaning just like tobacco or nicotine products, right? Over time, people develop a habit, a compulsive behavior, or even an addiction to pornography. And I'm not saying that everyone who's been exposed to porn is addicted. That's not true. But there's an abundance of research to show that porn addiction is very real. It shares many similarities to addiction to a substance like I said, nicotine, that makes cigarettes and tobacco products addictive. And aside from all the research, we know countless people, right? Everyone listening probably knows countless people who have struggled with pornography. They recognize it's affecting their life, and yet many of them can't seem to stop consuming it, even when they know that it's affecting their life. And that's not something we should ignore either, right? Is those personal accounts. And then we also know that it can be an escalating behavior, and that's something that's often overlooked. With cigarettes, again, going back to that, we see people need more cigarettes more frequently, right? So people go from smoking a couple cigarettes to a pack or 2 packs a day in extreme scenarios. But with pornography, they not only need more porn more frequently, they end up needing more extreme forms of content, according to the research. And so the problem with that is that when people need more extreme forms of content, the content that's produced becomes extremely more violent, abusive, degrading, and incredibly problematic. So not only now that we're, fully 30 years into online pornography has the content become increasingly problematic, but we also know these ways that it impacts the individual from really habit forming, escalating behavior, impacts their mental health.
So, Parker, there is a fantastic blog post on your website that I read, and it's called Why Today's Internet Porn is Unlike Anything the World Has Ever Seen. So kind of walk us through what parents need to know about this in 2025.
Yeah, and like you said, we kind of like touched on this, but to go a little bit deeper, the issue really is that the content has become more extreme for a few reasons, but mainly because we know when a consumer consumes pornography, they end up over time needing, like we talked about, more extreme forms of content. And if there's a demand for that, that will be produced, just like anything else in the marketplace, right? When there's a demand for something, it will be created. And the problem with this is that the nature of the content has become like that because porn itself, due to the ubiquity of the internet, the smartphone, has become more affordable, accessible, available, and anonymous than ever before. And so we're not talking about, a magazine on a shelf in a black bag at the liquor store or something like that anymore, right? We're talking about kids at far too young of ages having access to the entire internet in their pocket, adults and youth being exposed to increasingly problematic forms of content and then needing more extreme forms of content. So there's a demand for that, and that content is then produced. And then downstream effects of that are even that many people think porn's not a big deal. It doesn't hurt anybody else. And that's not true. You're a person, you have value, you matter. This will impact you. It will impact your relationships. But also the very nature of the content is exploitative. Much of the content available on mainstream porn sites is commercial sexual exploitation, has sexual abuse, sexual violence. And even in many cases, there have been many proven instances of sex trafficking occurring within the production of mainstream porn. So while people want to think it's not a big deal, it doesn't hurt anybody else, we're not sharing this information to shame anyone or make anyone feel bad. What we're trying to do is educate people so they can make healthy and informed decisions. You don't know what you don't know. And we want people to say, hey, now I do know that much of this content is exploitative. There are many examples of sex trafficking occurring within the production of mainstream porn. And now I know better. Let's make more healthy and informed decisions. Let's consider before consuming pornography. Let's choose not to consume pornography. Let's educate young people on the problems and recognize how young kids are exposed. If you want to talk about that a little bit, we definitely can.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second, but I'm glad you brought up the trafficking point because I've had multiple people on this show who have sat down and talked about human trafficking and how bad it is. And they talk about like the seed is planted sometimes for people in being exposed to pornography at young ages or even as an adult.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We have a lot of resources on our website that people can dive into after the show. Many, many true stories of people who were trafficked and exploited within the production of mainstream pornography. You can see those on our YouTube channel, on our blog, on our podcast, Consider Before Consuming. We have many, many, many survivors of this kind of commercial sexual exploitation. And one of the best examples of that, if people are like, point me to one of the most profound examples of this, is probably the girls do porn scenario. So a few years back, basically it came out that for almost a decade, a popular, well-known mainstream company called Girls Do Porn had been intentionally seeking out young, predominantly young women who didn't have a lot of experience in life and had smaller social media followings. They would message them, tell them that they wanted to, or post Craigslist ads, and they would tell these girls that they would be flying to California to do fitness photo shoots. So these women had the expectation that they were going to be modeling yoga clothing, fitness equipment, fashion, right? Normal jobs, completely normal thing, right? And instead, when they arrived at the airport, they were picked up, transported immediately to a location, and then almost all of these women were drugged, raped, held against their will, and forced to sign contracts and participate in pornography. Some of them were filmed for days on end in order to get a few minutes of content that looked consensual.
Mhm.
Now, the problem there is obviously huge, right? People didn't
Yeah.
believe the survivors for a long time. They thought they willingly went and shot pornography and then
Sure.
afterwards changed their mind or wanted to lie to their families or friends about why they did it. But in reality, it became at some point overwhelming the number of survivors of this kind of exploitation and abuse. So the executives of that company, some of them are on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list until they were found recently in New Zealand to stand trial. And, you can learn more about that on our website. We have articles, we have podcast episodes with one of the Jane Does, which is one of the women who was trafficked in the production of that pornography. And that's one of the best examples that I point to say, hey, this is why this content is so problematic. Or you can look at Nicholas Kristof's article from the New York Times, right? We're entitled The Children of Pornhub, which I understand is kind of a strong title for
Mhm.
people who are unfamiliar with this issue. But the amount of child sexual abuse material, formerly referred to as child pornography, that was readily available on mainstream porn sites like Pornhub, and the issues there, right? That's that's the reason that they deleted millions and millions and millions of videos overnight after that article came out. Visa and
Mhm.
MasterCard stopped processing payments
Well,
because
that's good.
of the backlash, right?
Mhm.
Now, those companies would say, oh, well, we just removed anyone that wasn't verified content. That doesn't mean all of that content was problematic. And it's like, well, that's problematic that much content was unverified. That means that anyone could upload anything and you had no idea who that person was, who was in the content, how it was made. Right, right. We had no idea what was happening. Of course, that content needed taken down. So, very problematic industry full of many, many issues that we don't even have time to dive into all of them today. But what we
Sure.
want parents to understand, obviously, is that porn impacts individuals' relationships in society. Kids are exposed younger than you think, and that we have to have honest and ongoing conversations. Because when we say pornography in 2025, it does not mean what it meant in 1985.
Agreed. And that's very well said. You were talking about, kids are, becoming exposed to this sort of stuff. What are the common ways that kids are stumbling into this or being shown this sort of content? Especially because most people listening to this, we have parental controls set up. We might have a True
Of
phone
course.
or something like that that's going to help filter this stuff out. But just walk us through the ways that kids can be exposed to this.
Yeah, great question. So, one study that comes to mind is a few years old now, but it showed that kids are exposed to porn in a variety of ways, but not necessarily in the ways that parents think. So, blocking content is a great idea. Like you're talking about, people should have filtration, monitoring,
Mm,
safe devices, conversations, all of these things. That's what we really want to advocate for. But as far as like the statistics, the reason these are so important is that many kids are exposed for the first time to pornography because someone else showed it to them when they weren't expecting it.
mm.
A much larger percentage of kids are shown pornography by someone else when they weren't expecting it than those who are accidentally exposed because something popped up on their phone or their computer. So when we recognize that, it's like, oh, no amount of filtration, monitoring, or safe tech alone will be sufficient if the way the majority of kids are exposed is because someone showed them pornography when they weren't expecting it. So a friend, someone older than them, which is even more problematic, right? So
Oh,
we
yeah.
have to find kind of a solution. And the solution we ultimately want to bring parents back to every time is having conversations with our kids. We understand that that seems uncomfortable and awkward, but we as parents are sometimes, not to like call anyone out, but we're responsible for some of that awkwardness and uncomfortableness because we are not
Yes, we are.
prepared to have the conversation.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the things that, like, I've had to sit down and talk to my son about, what happens on the internet. He's really into gaming and that sort of thing, and he's asked, like,
Of course.
"Hey, like, I wanna be able to talk to my friends, can I look at Discord or something like that?" And I'm like, "Absolutely not. I know what happens on Discord. Even if you have great intent, I know what happens on Discord, so no." And you gotta be able to tell them why, because if you just sit there and say, "No, kid, you can't do it. No, kid," they don't understand. If you kind of like bring them in as to why I'm going to say no to this and why you should be aware of this, it makes things so much easier. So, kind of Give me a couple of tips that I can use or the parents listening can use to be able to make this conversation a little less awkward for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really glad you asked that question because this is something that gets overlooked a lot of times when I do media appearances. But yeah, when it comes to talk with our kids, I want parents for a minute, like just bear with me for a minute. I want you to think about this scenario and how you would handle it. And then we'll talk about our kids and how we have conversations with them. So let's say that you're the primary income provider in your household. And let's say that you lost your job 6 months ago and you haven't found work yet and you haven't paid the mortgage for 2 months. It's a pretty stressful situation, right?
Sure. Yeah.
We don't want anyone to have to experience that. That would be horrible. But of course, things happen. So let's say that this is the scenario someone's in right now. And then let's say that the job they really want, their dream job that would solve a lot of these immediate issues, if they got the job, becomes available and they get an interview, right? So not only do they apply, but they already got an interview. So we're at that stage. I want you to think about like how prepared you would be for that interview in that crucial context. You would have a binder of like everything you've done for your last 3 employers to show your value, right? Every project you completed, what it entailed, how you saved money or sold more or whatever metrics your job would be looking for, right? You would be prepared knowing everything there is to know about the company and their products. You would be ready to answer any questions that the employer might ask you. You would have done mock interviews with a spouse or a friend or a kid or something, right? And you would actually have your own list of questions prepared to ask the interviewer so that it's more of like an interchange and they feel confident that you're capable. You're not just like rattling off robot answers. You would have done all of this and more, right? In order to try to get that job. But unfortunately, when it comes to talking with our kids about very difficult subjects like pornography, we don't do even a drop in the bucket as much work as that. And it leads to the conversation being incredibly painful and awkward when we're talking to our kids about sex or pornography because we don't understand what we're supposed to be explaining to our kids. We don't know how we should be talking about it or how that conversation varies at different ages or why it's even necessary, right? We'd rather just ignore it and just pretend like it's not a problem. And that's why there are so many issues. If we had these open, honest conversations, that would really solve a lot of these issues. So it's funny, we do live events, all over the country and even other parts of the world. And parents are always like on the edge of their seats. The last like half of the parent presentations, for example, is one of the types of audiences we speak to because they're like, there's going to be this like magic answer that like
Right.
comes down to having conversations with your kids. And the parents
Yeah.
are like, oh, man. They're just thinking
Yeah.
there's going to be some magical solution. That's what we all want. We want this magic diet pill. We want this magic solution
Hmm.
that just makes this thing easier. We want this filtering or monitoring thing that'll just fix the problem for us. And while all of those resources are great, we're just trying to say alone they are not enough.
Hmm.
Conversations in conjunction with safe technology is the solution.
Right. Yeah. Because when they know to look out for the problem, they can see it coming and avoid it, or have the confidence to come to you and say, "Hey, I saw something online today that really made me uncomfortable."
Exactly.
You know, talk to your kids to where they will talk to you. Don't.
100%.
I got this great piece of advice not long ago, and it's just generally in talking to your kids. And I think it's Nate Webb. I think I follow him on TikTok. He's like this school counselor guy, and so he was saying your kids are afraid to talk to you because one, they're afraid that you're going to correct them for something that they may have done wrong, or they're afraid that you're going to punish them for something that they did. So they're just not talking to you. So I have really tried myself to personally put that stuff down because that was me. I will admit that. And that has really changed the communication between me and my wife and my son by just letting him talk and listen. And I think that kind of applies to what you were just saying.
100%. 100%. And we have great resources for this on our website. There's something called the Conversation Blueprint. It can kind of help parents map out what this conversation could look like ahead of time, rehearse the conversation, and reduce the overall awkwardness and anxiety and fear that people often have.
Right. So just kind of tell me, we've talked about pornography being described and how it affects the brain kind of like as a drug does. What are the signs or what's happening? How does this work to affect their relationships, society, them as an individual? How is this really damaging?
Yeah, really what it comes down to, aside from the pieces we talked about of like the broader impacts on society and the individual themselves, is like you said, relationships. We know from many fields of research that the greatest determiner of happiness in someone's life is their relationships, their closest connections. So their family, their friends, their spouse, their children, all of these things are what's going to determine our happiness. And research shows time and time again that pornography impacts our relationships. We often describe it as porn impacts what we love, how much we love, and how we think about the people that we love. And what that just means simply is that research shows that individuals who consume porn, it can often become a supernormal stimulus. Many researchers consider porn to be a supernormal stimulus. This means that they spend more and more time consuming pornography and less time seeking out their partner or looking for a partner and interested in real life relationships. They'd rather just spend time alone consuming pornography, which again is not good for our mental health. We
Sure.
know that when it comes to relationships, when we're talking about how much we love, that individuals who consume porn have a greater tendency to cheat, to have their relationship end, to be dissatisfied in their relationship, right? And the interesting thing about those studies is they are all directional findings, meaning there's a very strong correlation because the more porn that is consumed in the relationship, the greater the likelihood of those outcomes. So a really strong correlation. And in fact, one study showed that they followed couples for 6 years. They wanted to see what would determine if a relationship would be less happy in the future than they are today. And they found that porn was the second greatest indicator that a relationship would become less happy over time.
Okay.
And people always ask me, what's the greatest indicator, right? They think it's going to be money or something like that.
Hmm.
The interesting thing about the study is, for whatever reason, they chose not to use if the couples started the study as unhappy as a control.
Mm.
So the greatest determinator of a couple being unhappy in the future is if they're unhappy today and they don't do anything to change that, then of course they'll be
Mm.
unhappy in the future.
Sure.
Usually in a lot of studies, something like that would be considered a control. And if that was the case in this study, porn actually would have been the greatest indicator, but second only to that, porn
Okay.
was the greatest indicator that a relationship would suffer over time, meaning that their relationship quality and happiness would decrease over time. So yeah, we know that these issues are real. We know porn impacts relationships and connections. And although most of the research is on how porn impacts romantic relationships, there's more research being done all the time to show that porn impacts all types of meaningful connection. And to my knowledge, there still to this day hasn't been a single longitudinal study that over time showed that porn had any positive impact on relationships.
That's a big statement. I mean,
Yeah.
what good is it going to do you? I read in early 2024 that apparently in 2023 the United States did not basically produce enough people to sustain it going forward. It was the first time we'd seen a huge population drop in the U.S. Now I know there's a lot of factors that's involved with that. Do you feel like pornography and its effect on relationships is any play there?
Yeah, I mean, just speaking anecdotally, I don't know if any specific research, but we know that pornography causes people to struggle with mental health and encourages loneliness. And so, of course, this loneliness epidemic, which, like you acknowledge, there's many parts to, um, pornography, of course, is playing a role in that, in addition to many other issues in the modern era, like social media and technology and lifestyle and cost of living and all these different things. But pornography absolutely, I think, plays a role in that anecdotally because we know it increases people's loneliness. We know that people are more likely to spend time alone consuming pornography. Of course, that's going to lead to less of a desire to seek out a partner in real life.
Very cool. So let me ask you this. The
Yeah.
rise of OnlyFans has increased self exploitation. And while it started off kind of as this oddity, it's now become more mainstream. So how do we tell our kids to be cautious of this when they are trying to become, digital influencers themselves? How do we tell them OnlyFans is not the way to do this?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I just have a quick question. What's OnlyFans? No, I'm just kidding. So we obviously know what OnlyFans is, but I think probably most of the listeners may have no idea what OnlyFans is. Um, and I don't mean to be insensitive by making a joke
Oh,
to the
sure. Yeah,
listeners. I
yeah.
just people to know that I deal in this heavy issue every day, and we have to find a way to educate without shame, and also, trying to talk about this issue in a healthy way. So yeah, OnlyFans, let's kind of just quickly acknowledge what the platform is, and then we can kind of answer some of the problems for young people. So OnlyFans is a platform where people pay for content from someone. So the idea is that they're allegedly paying directly, like the money's going directly to someone minus a commission to OnlyFans, and then that person produces content. So similar in a way that you subscribe to Netflix, you pay them $20 every month, and Netflix creates content that we all watch. You could go to a very specific person, Jane Doe, pay them $20 a month and get access to all of their content. That means that by and large, almost all of the content on OnlyFans is pornographic in nature. There's very few people and very little content on the platform that is not pornographic in nature. Almost everything on the platform is pornographic. So people are essentially subscribing to very specific individuals that they want to get pornographic content from. Now, here's the problem with OnlyFans is this is a huge conversation. I would really encourage listeners to go and listen to our interview with Victoria Sinus, who started an OnlyFans marketing agency, to really understand what OnlyFans is and the problem that it's creating. OnlyFans is a huge issue for young people because they're being falsely led to believe that this is empowerment, that they're free. But we know that OnlyFans has almost all of the same issues as the existing mainstream porn platforms that we've already discussed today that have their own issues, right? OnlyFans has been in trouble time and time again for having child sexual abuse material, meaning a young person. So someone has a verified account where they submitted their ID, sure, but they're a sex trafficker. So they upload content of sex trafficking victims or minors to that account, and then people subscribe to that account. Even if the account gets taken down, they just make another account, right? So that's already a huge problem. Some of the other problems are that young people are so deceived into thinking that they can easily make money on the platform, that some of them don't even wait until they're 18 to make content, and instead they steal a parent or an older sibling's ID, create OnlyFans of themselves, and then produce content while they're underage. Another issue, which has become a very large problem because it's like a little bit of a gray area. Ethically, it's not, but ethically it's very black and white, but legally it's a little bit of a gray area, is what people are calling legacy pornography. So individuals that are under the age of 18 take pornographic content of themselves while they're a minor, and then they wait to distribute that until they're over 18. So they're distributing child sexual abuse material of themselves as a minor, now as an adult. That's a huge problem, right? And we could
That's
go
new
on
to
and
me.
on
I had
about
not heard
all
of that
these
one.
issues.
Goodness.
Yeah, legacy porn. So
oh, wow.
there are so many issues with not only the platform, but the impact it's having on society and culture. Young people think that, everyone wants to be an influencer, and now everyone thinks, oh, well, that's actually quite a bit of work, they're starting to realize. But it's really easy, making money on OnlyFans, which is actually not true. You can read a little bit on our website about how, I think if I remember right, the average OnlyFans content creator is making like almost no money. I mean, a very insignificant sum of money every month. The top 1% on the platform make 99% or whatever of the money on the platform, right? And those aren't exact statistics, but I just meant generally speaking, you can read the statistics on our website. But it's a huge problem because everyone thinks that they will make money, and they're exploiting themselves for almost nothing because they end up not really making any money. Those images are out there for forever. Even if they shut down the account, people have already downloaded the content, screenshotted it, screen recorded it, whatever, right? So the nature of the platform itself is problematic because one person could subscribe, get access to the content, and then put it all somewhere else for free. So there's so many issues with OnlyFans, and it really is impacting young people today. We need parents to kind of be aware of this issue. I know it's super heavy to hear all that for the first time. I just explained all this stuff that people have probably never even heard of.
Right.
But that's why it's so important to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you've educated me here, and I appreciate that. And you made the great point of the pictures that you take, the videos that you upload, like they don't go anywhere. They're still there. Even though you delete your account, maybe you change your life, you realize this is not what you want to do anymore. But unfortunately, those things are still out there, and you've got to live with it. And that's the same thing that, I encourage people to tell their kids about. If their kids send a text or they send a picture, to one person, it could go all over the place and that sort of thing. So we have to to help them understand not to make the content in the first place and understand why that's bad.
Yeah, absolutely. We just need kids to understand that what they're being sold isn't um, as glamorous as it seems to be.
Yeah, that's cool. So, Parker, as we wrap up here, we've talked
Yeah,
about a lot of stuff. We've thrown a lot of things at people.
totally.
What is something that you feel like we missed? What is something at its core that you feel that every family needs to understand about this topic?
Yeah. Really that we want people to understand that this doesn't have to be the end of the world, right? If your kid's been exposed
Mm,
to pornography, if you're struggling with pornography, the parent, as a parent, if you're struggling now or have in the past, not only are you the most qualified person to talk to your kids about this because you're their parent, but you're the most qualified person to talk to your kids also because you have personally struggled with pornography. So I would encourage parents who've been exposed or are struggling not to feel unqualified to talk to their children about this subject. If anything, they're the most qualified person because they understand the issue better. Now, additionally, with our kids, we want to avoid shame. There's a difference between
mhm,
guilt and shame. We often conflate these words. It sounds like you're familiar with this and your audiences as well, I'm sure. But basically, guilt says this behavior is unhealthy. It impacts my life and the people I care about. Doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean this is permanent. It doesn't mean that things can't get better. Things can absolutely get better. I can heal. I can participate in healthier behaviors, right? This doesn't have to stay this way. It doesn't define who I am. Those are all healthy thoughts when it comes to something that's unhealthy. The problem with shame is not that way. And that's what we want people to avoid is shame. Shame are the thoughts of I'm broken, I'm messed up, something's wrong with me, no one else struggles with this, no one will understand, this will never get better. This is just the way I am, I'm broken, right? Like those are not healthy thoughts. If you or someone you know is having those thoughts, please talk with a friend, a spouse, a family member, a therapist, because those are not thoughts that we want people to be having. And so, as parents, we need to do everything we can to help avoid shame around the subject while also encouraging kids to make healthier behaviors and to realize the consequences of consuming pornography, but without them feeling shame, right? This is an unhealthy behavior that someone has participated in. This does not mean that they are a bad person. Those are different things. It's a behavior, it's a choice that we made. It's not who you are.
that's an excellent way to end this, sir. I really do appreciate that. So, Parker, if people want to
Cool.
know more about this, and I'm sure that they do, where can they find out more about you and what you're doing and Fight the New Drug?
Yeah, absolutely. At Fight the New Drug on all the social media platforms. We have over 6 million followers across platforms. And then our website, ftnd.org. That's just short for Fight the New Drug, ftnd.org. If you go to ftnd.org/parents, all of our parent resources are kind of easily accessible in that one place, which is kind of nice. But either way, you'll find all of our resources on our website. And then just the last thing I would just pitch to people is I want people to understand that in a post COVID world, one of the best ways to educate on this subject is to really consider having someone from our organization come out and do live events in your community. Because in a post COVID world where everyone's spending more time alone, more time on devices, the best way to really get this issue in front of your community, in front of your children, in front of your children's friends is to have a live speaker in the community come and speak about the impacts of porn. So we do live events for middle schools, junior highs, high schools, parent nights, community groups, churches, and college campuses, everything in between, right? So workplaces, whatever it might be, we'd be happy to come into a community, do a series of events in a community at various places and kind of help raise awareness and educate. So yeah, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I want to get more involved, this really is a grassroots movement. The best thing you can do is call your old high school principal, go talk to your children's school administrators, talk to a pastor, talk to your boss, or talk to someone in the community that has a community outreach group or something and see if we can get a live event, bring people from the community in, help educate parents and youth, and create kind of a movement within your city or your town to reject the harms of pornography, to help people to consider before consuming and make healthier decisions.
Very cool, sir. Man, I appreciate your time today. I appreciate everything that you have educated us on. And man, God bless you in your future and your mission and what you're doing, buddy.
Thank you. This was great. Thanks for having us.